Hello, and welcome back to Emotions and the Aging Process. This is a 10-part series on television, and today Dr. Ron Cepitelli and I are presenting Part 8. Ron Cepitelli, you're calling this program, today's segment, Receptive Listening.
That's correct.
Before we get started explaining that and why it is so helpful and can be a really critical component of being a caregiver or a care receiver, let's remind everyone of your website, which is vermontsmp.org/emotions. Again, that's Vermont, S. Sally, M. Mary, P. Peter.org/emotions. Receptive listening. What is that? Why is it important?
Well, Naomi, let me first ask you a question about something that's negative. And what I'd like to ask is, has anyone close to you died recently?
Oh, yes.
Tell me about it.
Not someone I was terribly close to at this stage of my life, but a childhood friend, someone I'd grown up with, and assumed this person, based on meetings we'd encounter each other, bump into each other rather in the grocery store or at the swimming pool. Someone who seemed reasonably well adjusted, had grown up children. I was shocked first when I heard that he had passed away. I hadn't known of any illness, and he was too young to die of old age. He wasn't in an old age bracket. And then it began to seem as though there had been some kind of, I don't know, either foul play or that people were clearly not talking about why this person had died. So I began to wonder whether he had been murdered or he had killed himself. And it took an awfully long time to find out from a mutual friend that, as she put it, he blew his brains out. So there was the shock value. And then the reason why people weren't talking, first of all, people don't want to talk about suicide. This is someone who turned out to have been mentally ill. His mental illness did not manifest itself till I wasn't really, we'd gone off to college. So I wasn't involved with this person anymore as a childhood friend, which happens with some frequency with some mental illnesses like bipolar disorder and some kinds of schizophrenia. And so it's a terrible tragedy, first of all, that this person who was not poor, not on the street, had some means, he wasn't wealthy, but he had some means for help, for therapy, for drugs, ended up taking his own life. So I guess my frustration and my anger is over what happened, why? How could his family have let him, well, I guess, they don't have control over him, but how could he not have gotten better help? And the societal stigma, which is what rubs the salt in the wound, why didn't people just say, tell me what happened from day one? Why did I have to root around for 2 or 3 weeks to finally find out what happened? So the reminder that we live in a society where it's taboo to talk about mental illness. And therefore, if you can't talk about it, you can't treat it.
And that's infuriating.
It's quite infuriating. So again, this is someone I wasn't close to on a day-to-day basis in my adult life. But his death reminds me of all these societal issues that make me crazy.
Okay. Thank you, Naomi. Okay. So what we did here was receptive listening.
You let me just talk.
I let you just talk, and first of all, I asked a question not about you. I asked you to talk about somebody else, okay?
Why is that important?
Because we're more likely to talk about somebody else, especially when it's emotional, than ourselves, okay? And then after you describe this, really negative situation where our society doesn't talk about it, okay, I sensed that that was infuriating to you, that we don't talk about this in our society and so forth, and you agreed with me, okay? So that means I now know the feeling you had at that.
What would have happened if I hadn't agreed with you?
If I hadn't, I would have asked you, okay, what was it like, okay? So what is it like? But what normally, if they don't agree, the person will say what it was, okay? Or say, oh, no, I felt fine. It wasn't a problem with me at all, okay? Something like that. So I then know that's a defense. They're being defensive against their feeling.
And how can you tell them? Because if the person, suppose I had gone on and on and on about my friend, and then in response to you saying that was infuriating, I said, nah, it's fine.
Yeah.
So you're basing that judgment about my being defensive on the fact that I carried on with some emotional quality in my talking.
Correct. And so that gives me a signal, okay, that you talking about your anger, okay, is hard for you. Doesn't make you a bad person or do anything wrong. That's difficult for you. Okay, so I put that in my mental clipboard, and then of course, you just keep on talking. Okay, and that's the idea. And I think, you would have kept on talking if, we continued this, and that's what's very important.
So tell me, you started to get into some of the components of receptive listening, what you were doing, analyzing what you were doing and why.
Okay.
Can you tell me more about what's involved?
Yes.
You and I talked, you asked me a question and I gave you an answer that probably lasted 90 seconds. But in a longer conversation with a friend or a caretaker or a therapist, you might have an hour and you'd go on. Tell us what you would do and some of the components.
Yeah, so let me first explain how receptive listening works, okay? And why it works and the results you're looking for. So being receptive to another person means that when I respond to what you're saying, okay, you know that I've heard what you've said and I am receptive to it.
How do I know that?
Okay, you know that by how you respond. Yes, that's what it was. Yes, this is what it was. Okay, you're going to tell me. You just tell me, okay? And the other thing a person does, is they keep on talking. And if they're talking and giving you new information, okay, that's what we're looking for. Because the more we can talk about something, the less we're going to act out on it, if we're putting it all into language, okay? So that is the idea behind what receptive listening is, especially negative feelings and negative thoughts. We tend to want to change it. Okay, oh no, that's not what's going to happen, that's not helpful.
It drives me crazy, actually.
Yes. So that's that's the idea behind it. Now, how do we do that? So receptive listening has several basic components on it. The first one is that we try to not put the word you in a sentence.
Really?
Yes. Well, I don't want to ask a question about why you feel bad, okay? But I may say, that's infuriating, okay? Now, why is that important? When I say that's infuriating, that means that this person who committed suicide and no one was told about his mental health issues, and you didn't know it, which made you infuriating, would make me infuriated as well. So we are now, in a sense, joined. We have the same understanding of what's going on. And what happens when we're around people who are like us?
We tend to feel comfortable.
We feel comfortable, we say more, we do more with those people. So that's what we're doing.
And there are several specific components, like joining.
Yes. Okay. So joining is, I made an attempt at it by saying, this is infuriating, okay? And I'm going to see if we're going to be joined together on that. We do it many other ways, in the sense of agreeing with people when they say something, okay? My mother yells at me all the time, and I hate it when she yells at me, and I really want to yell back on her. I'll go, yeah, I bet you do, okay? So I'm joining that person with that statement, okay? And then I might say something, well, what do you want to say? Okay? So, and now that person's going to talk more, and they're going to explain what they're doing. Another one is mirroring, and that's done in many ways. It can be when a patient, for example, a patient walks in a room and their head is down and they're very down. I might say something like, oh, is it raining outside? Okay, they're gloomy, they have a depressed look, the rain tends to make us feel gloomy and so forth. And that's just to get a, no, it's not rainy and so forth. And so that's kind of, I'm mirroring what they're doing.
Oh, through words. That
Yes.
sounds tricky.
Yeah, well, it is. It takes a little practice and a little skill, and you have to know the person first of all. So it takes a little bit of time. Okay. Another way in groups is if someone's complaining about something in their life, and I know someone else in the group has similar type experiences, I may say, "Oh, Mary, what do you think of what Naomi's thinking?" Okay, so I'm going to have Naomi now both mirror and join your complaining.
Tell me a little bit more about mirroring. In the example you gave, which was clear, I'm trying to think of what would I do in a similar situation, but without Dr. Ron Sapatelli there. So you're going in to see a patient who conveys what you interpret, and it is your interpretation as some emotion.
Yes.
And you gave an example about depression,
Yep.
head is down. Could be sleepy.
Could be. Yeah.
And so you, as you said, never used the word you, Y-O-U. You talked about rain to elicit a conversation.
Correct.
So let me just be clear. By using the word mirroring, you are in your speech trying to reflect the emotion that this person
That's correct.
is conveying. Okay.
Yes.
And you're being an emotional mirror.
Correct.
There's also something with a longer name, object orienting.
Yes. So that's an object-oriented question, and that is, very important. And again, it goes back to not using you in a sentence. So I'm going to ask a question about an object that is not you. Okay, so we're talking, you're the subject, okay? You're
Okay.
talking to me. An object would be talking about somebody else or something else.
Okay, give me an example.
Okay,
Ask
so-
me a question.
Okay. What did you have for breakfast today?
Oh, it's so long ago,
Excuse
I
me,
can barely
wrong
remember.
question. What was for breakfast today?
What was for breakfast today? I had a very small apple cranberry bran muffin.
So that, interestingly, that is a question that people who do receptive listening will use in a situation where someone is not talking. So sometimes you deal with adolescents or even adults who are just kind of sullen, they don't want to talk. So you give them the idea, listen, you can talk about anything in here. Tell me what was for breakfast, okay? Or if they're talking about someone yelling at them or being depressed or something like that, you'll say, well, what did they say? Why are they doing that? It's about that other person. And so you'll talk about that other person.
And that is object orienting.
That's right. It's the object, not about the person.
Great.
Now, we can put you in a sentence and so forth, but that's not the idea behind it. We want to keep it away from you.
Okay, so I'm trying to formulate my mental construct, making it like a building. The architecture for receptive listening has rooms, and in one, there are components in one room, that like furniture rather, joining, mirroring, object orienting.
Correct.
Okay, I'm going to move into another room
Okay.
because we have some examples here taken through your research from aides, nursing home aides you're working with. And one of them, this is so interesting. There are two aides in this scenario discussing the same patient. And one of them says, I can't understand him for crap. I'll try not to make this too emotional read. I just don't want to deal with all of the stuff, his stuff, over and over. He has one good arm and one good leg. His speech, or we take it lack of clear speech, is just due to laziness. Tell me about this aide.
Okay. So there's a couple of things I want to say about this aide. But, listening to that, is that aide being receptive to this nursing home resident?
If I had to judge just by what I read, I would say no.
Correct. Okay, so she is not receptive to her, and she has strong feelings, okay? And I can't stand that stuff for crap and so forth. So another major component of receptive listening is to pay attention to my feelings. What are my feelings like as I'm talking with you? Okay, she is clearly not paying attention to her feelings. She's just expressing them. Okay, she's just actually acting out. Okay, she's not even expressing them. She's just being critical and judging this person. Okay, who was in a car accident 30 years ago and has one arm he can move. That's it. Okay,
Oh my.
and barely move a leg, and she's being very critical. So there's what happened now. If she's not allowed to say things like this in a safe environment, then eventually she will act out in some ways. And this is a resident, an aide, who during the beginning of our research project, and actually the first session, they were talking about residents they liked and didn't like, and living in a nursing home and not living in a nursing home, the aides themselves. And she said, no, not me. I could not live in a place like here. If I lived in this place, pow, she says, that's what I'd do. Okay? So obviously she would commit suicide. So this project lasted about 6 months. I'm going to say 1 to 2 years later, this aide is still working in the nursing home, and a resident rolled out of bed onto the floor. She was the first aide in there. An aide was behind her, and it was the roommate, and she bent down over the resident on the floor and said, hey, why don't you just get a gun and end it right now? Okay, so
I know you're not making that up, but it sounds like a bad script for a bad movie.
well, this is what happens if we're not allowed to express ourselves on a regular basis. And to get now it doesn't happen instantaneously, and it has to be continual. Okay, you have to continue. We need to do that in the healthcare field and actually in all of life. We all need to do that.
There are alternate routes toward dealing with the patient, what a patient brings in to this situation. So one of my points of curiosity is, yes, the aides and everyone else involved need desperately to talk and maybe to have some strategies. So you have an example that I'll read from the speech, what another aide said about the same patient.
Correct.
His legs start shaking, just like a little dog. It goes 1,000,000 miles an hour, and then the aide will say to the resident, what is up with that leg, Tony? You are just like a little dog when you see the staff person. And he is like, arr! And he is so funny. Scratch him behind the ears. He's a riot. I wish we all had the same relationship with him. Some people won't even go near him.
That's correct. So this may not be the appropriate way to deal with a resident and talk to a resident, but this aide is actually trying in her primitive way to connect with him. All right, she kind of gets what this is all about, okay? And she doesn't know how to deal with it appropriately, but she's making this, this attempt to connect to his emotions. So she kind of gets it. Very different than the first aide, who's totally denying her own feelings, okay, about what this resident might be feeling like, having only one arm, one leg, and he can't talk.
Mm-hmm. And when you say denying her own feelings,
correct,
let's get into that somewhat, because we were talking about, it's one thing to try and have empathy with someone who only has one arm or one leg that can be used. To go back to that first aide who had only negative things to say, I can't understand him, I don't want to deal with his stuff, he's just lazy. What do you suppose she's feeling inside that brings about that hard exterior?
Correct. Well, there's a dual thing, set of feelings going on. First of all, she has to, in looking at him, okay, deny to herself that something like this could happen to her. She could be like this. And an interesting thing is that aide was about the same age as this resident. And very often, caregivers will talk about how shocked they are when they see someone their age with cancer, with an accident, and so forth. So she has that to deal with. First of all, how do you think this resident feels being trapped for over 30 years in a nursing home? Okay? He has a lot of negative stuff that he kind of acts out a little bit. So she's absorbing the feelings from him. So she can't really deal with it anyway. She's not paying attention to her own feelings. So she's one way she does is to be critical of other people as an attempt. It doesn't work, but it's an attempt to try to manage those feelings of hers.
Mm-hmm.
Her next step was, telling a resident you should, end
Take
it all
your own
right.
life.
Yeah. So that's where the receptiveness needs to happen. You have to be receptive to these residents.
Let's go into one more anecdote, and then I'll ask you about some other strategies.
Okay.
Because I think it's important to be strategy-oriented. So here's another aide talking about her reaction to a resident in an institution. Now, this aide at home, in her personal life, has a daughter who's disabled. We don't know exactly how, but a disabled daughter who must need quite a bit of personal care. And the aide feels that her own daughter is manipulative. So the aide goes to work and is working with a particular patient who, and this is how the aide describes the patient: I get pissy, she makes me angry. You know what I mean? She tends to do the crippled little girl thing. The resident is the mistress of that, and I don't like that. My responses to her are very sarcastic. She doesn't come to me as much anymore because she knows I'm going to be sarcastic. And I say I'm busy. One day, I told her to eat a grinder, and I got reported. Yeah. So first of all, what does eat a grinder mean?
Well, that is, if this resident ate a grinder, she would probably die. She would have a reaction to it.
Oh,
Okay.
Because of her medical issues.
The medical issues, correct. Now, interesting, you made a Freudian slip here, which was actually correct. Okay, you said, the aide said that her daughter was not manipulative at home.
Yep.
You said her daughter was manipulative. Well, that's really the truth. So she's projecting her feelings about her daughter, which she denies to herself in real life, onto this resident. So she actually is saying to the resident what she really can't say to her daughter.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So this resident, of course, induces her with feelings. These induced feelings that she gets from the resident are the same feelings she denies about her daughter, but now she's having them here. So it would be very important to her to talk about her daughter as well as about her patient and what is going on.
And then do what? You've gotten in your really descriptive anecdotes, like this aide.
So what is going on here? What these anecdotes that you're describing, okay, came from my research group.
Yep.
In that research group, I use receptive listening with them. I would just ask them, what next, and what did she say, and what did he say, and wow, or that's terrible, and so forth. And so that allowed them to do this. Okay, they don't talk about these things with their bosses or their colleagues even, okay, unless they're having a couple of drinks in a bar or something, okay? I'm being facetious with that. But what happened, by allowing that, eventually they can start thinking about what they're saying and thinking about what other people are saying. And then they develop some curiosity. And with curiosity, there's change.
Explain that further. Curiosity about what? Leading to what kind of change?
So I'll give you an example of another. So one of these aides worked with a resident who had very poor speech. And when she got assigned him, he said, "Oh my God, he throws stuff. He throws his TV remote." She said, "If he throws it at me, I'm out of there." And what did she find later? In listening to him, she found out that he was trying to explain to the aides that his roommate, who watched religious shows on TV all the time, when his wife came in, he used to kick and pinch his wife. And no one ever listened to him. So he would throw the remote to try to get people's attention, and the aides thought he was throwing it at them, and he was a violent guy.
Wow.
So this is what happens when you start listening to people. And then the same aide of the same man then got curious and realized, and as they were talking about this guy used to be a carpenter, and she talked about getting some toys in that he could work on, sand them down or something for Christmas presents and so forth. So this is what gets developed out of it. Okay, they're saying these things that you think, oh my God, these are terrible things. Okay, but if we let them do that, and we're receptive to it, we're not judging them, criticizing them, and so forth. Okay?
I'm hearing in what you just said that some creativity helps as well. So that listening, giving, whether it's the patient, the client, the caregiver, the administrator, everyone's kind of
Absolutely.
in a war zone. So they need to be understood. And then I loved what you said about giving this guy something to do, to focus on. Having beyond that, I think, let me back up a step. I think you're saying people can begin to resolve their own issues and help each other if they take the time to really listen and understand.
And to be listened to
Yes.
and understood.
And beyond that, so that's huge. And beyond that, that can open them up to coming up with some other solutions
Strategies.
Beyond the listening, whether
Absolutely.
it's sanding down wooden blocks
Yes.
or doing the dishes, something. I like doing the dishes, but most people, something enjoyable and productive.
Yes. That, again, she realized this guy used to be a carpenter. It was something that he might, Another interesting thing about this resident and this aide is she'd talk about him, and he was very difficult for her to understand. And she would go into the great lengths to try to understand him. And she would say things like, I look at him, he has the most beautiful blue eyes. He must have been such a handsome man. I mean, she was really connecting to him. Really connecting to him.
That's powerful.
Yes.
Dr. Ron Sepitelli, we have to wind this down.
Okay.
Thank you for ending with a beautiful story about someone, an aide, recognizing beauty and something special about one of her clients. This has been segment 8, Receptive Listening, in a series we're calling Emotions and the Aging Process. We're online all the time at vermontsmp.org/emotions. That's Vermont, S. Sally, M. Mary, P. Paul.org/emotions. Call us at 802-356-3388, 802-356-3388. We also accept email. That's info@vermontsmp.org, info@vermontsmp.org. Thanks very much for being with us. We'll see you again next week.